A millionaire found an abandoned girl on the street with a baby in her arms. When asked where she came from, her answer shocked him. The San Diego City and USAWAs, famous for its cobblestone streets, vibrant colonial facades, and a calm atmosphere that attracted tourists from all over. However, a sudden storm that erupted over the city that afternoon shattered the calm. The rain came down hard, turning the streets into small stream sand, forcing the few passers-by to scramble for shelter under overhangs and doorways. Edward Whitmore, a 53-year-old local businessman, was driving his old but well-kept Range Rover through the narrow streets. Was a respected man known for his business success, yet lately he felt that something was missing in his life. He had achieved prosperity, but that prosperity didn't feel the emptiness he felt that afternoon. As the rain pounded on the car roof, he was lost in thought, reflecting on his afternoon. As the rain pounded on the car roof, he was lost in thought, reflecting on the car roof. Increasingly monotonous routine. As he rounded a corner, Edward was forced to brake suddenly. A traffic light had turned red, and the traffic ahead was slow due to water pooling in the road. That's when something caught his eye. On the sidewalk, huddled against a wall, was a little girl no older than 7, completely drenched. What he had first thought was just a shadow turned out to be a young girl holding a small bundle close to her chest. Edward frowned, intrigued. He wasn't usually one to get involved in strangers' problems, but something about this scene stirred him in a different way. Looking closer, he realized that the bundle in the girl's arms was in fact a baby, a young girl alone in the rain, caring for someone even smaller. Edward's heart tightened, and he felt an unexpected urge to help. Without a second thought, he parked his car by the curb and turned off the engine. The rain pelted his face as soon as he stepped out, but he didn't mind. He approached the girl, cautiously, careful not to frighten her more than she already seemed. "Hello, sweetheart," said his voice, gentle, as he tried to be heard over the noise of the storm. "What are you doing here all alone in the rain?" Edward asked gently. Girl looked up slowly, her face a portrait of fear and hopelessness, held the baby close to her chest as if it were the only thing in her world that still made sense. Edward kneeled beside her, doing his best to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Where are your parents?" he asked, searching for some rational explanation to make sense of this situation. "I don't have parents," she whispered, her voice as fragile as a thread about to snap. "They left me here." Edward felt a tight knot in his stomach. He knew that even though the small town seemed welcoming, it harbored its secrets, but he never would have imagined that a child could be abandoned like this, let alone with a baby in her arms. "Who left you here?" Edward asked, his tone now laced with concern. "Do you know their name?" The girl hesitated, as though the answer she was about to give might bring danger. "The woman from the orphanage," finally replied, staring at the ground. "She said she didn't want to take care of me and my brother anymore." Edward was silent for a moment, taking in what he had just heard. An orphanage, leaving a child out on the street. It was unthinkable. Even in the most distant places, what was really going on in this town? Edward realized he couldn't just walk away. Something was very wrong. "Let's get out of this rain." "Okay," he said softly, reaching his hand toward the girl. "He'll take you somewhere safe, and we'll figure this out." The girl hesitated, but Edward's gentle tone reassured her. Finally, she took his hand, and they walked together to his car. Edward opened the back door and helped her in making sure the baby was safe and secure. As he got back in the driver's seat, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the girl trying to comfort the baby, who whimpered from cold or hunger. As he drove through the flooded streets, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. Needed to find out what was happening at that orphanage, and most importantly, how he could help these young lives that had suddenly crossed his path. The rain kept falling steadily as Edward navigated the winding streets, his mind racing with thoughts. In the back seat, the girl and the baby sat quietly, except for an occasional muffled sob. Edward wanted to ask questions to understand what was going on, but he knew he needed to tread carefully. Last thing Edward wanted was to frighten that little girl who'd already been through so much. Finally, he decided to stop at a small coffee shop. He knew well a quiet, cozy place where he could warm up the kids and maybe learn more about their situation. He parked the car in front of the cafe, a rustic spot with soft lights spilling out through fogged-up windows. Stepping out of the car, grabbed an umbrella Maya from the trunk and approached the back door. "Sweetheart, let's go inside and warm up a bite," said, opening the door for the girl. She nodded, still clutching the baby tightly as she climbed out from under Edward's umbrella. Maya, as they entered the cafe together, they noticed the welcoming atmosphere and the aroma of freshly baked bread. Cafe owner, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Porter, looked at Edward in surprise, noticing the soaked children he had brought with him. "Edward, what happened, Edwell? Are these children?" she asked, concerned. "It's a long story, Porter," Edward replied, leading the girl to a table by the fireplace. "But I could use some help. Could you bring us something warm to drink and maybe a towel? They're freezing." Of course, right away," Mrs. Porter said, hurrying into the kitchen. Edward helped the girl sit down and gently took the baby from her arms, cradling him carefully and noticing just how small and fragile he was. The girl watched him closely, still uncertain about the man who had suddenly become her protector. "What's your name?" Edward asked gently, hoping to ease the silence. "Maya, sir," she replied, her voice low and hesitant. "And your little brother's name?" he continued, trying to earn her trust. "Eli." "He's very little," Maya said with a worried expression. Edward nodded, feeling a wave of compassion for this young girl, already carrying such a heavy burden. "Maya, can you tell me more about what happened? Why did the woman from the orphanage leave you out here?" Maya looked down, her small hands clutching the edge of the table. Edward waited patiently without pressing her as Mrs. Porter returned with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a soft towel. "Here, drink this. It'll help warm you up," Edward said, sliding one of the cups toward Maya. Maya held the cup with both hands, but didn't drink right away. An uneasy silence hung between them until finally Maya spoke up, her voice barely steady. "The woman from the orphanage said she couldn't take care of Eli and me anymore." Her eyes flickered with pain. "She was angry, always angry. She said we were a burden, that no one wanted kids like us." Edward felt a tightness in his chest as he listened. How could anyone be so cruel to a child? Thought, his heart aching. Maya went on. "She put us in her car and drove us into the city. When we got there, she just left us. I tried to follow her, but she got back in the car and drove away." Maya's voice caught, and Edward saw the tears she was holding back slide silently down her cheeks. "Do you know where that orphanage is?" Edward asked, a quiet anger simmering within him. Maya nodded slightly. "I do, but I don't want to go back there," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost a breath. Edward reached across the table, placing his hand on hers, offering her a quiet reassurance. "You won't have to go back, promised, but we need to figure out what's going on there. If they did this to you and imagine what they might be doing to other kids." Maya looked up at Edward, her large eyes filled with a mix of fear and something that looked like hope. For the first time, she felt like someone actually cared, like someone was willing to stand up for Harry. "Trust you," she said at last, her voice filled with the strength Edward hadn't expected. "And I'm going to help you, Maya. I'm going to find out what's happening and make sure you and Eli are safe. That's my promise." Edward and Maya formed an unlikely bond inside the cafe as the storm outside continued to batter the small town. They were both driven by a desire for justice, a desire to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Edward understood he was about to face something far bigger than he had anticipated, but he also knew he couldn't turn back. Was in this now, and nothing would make him quit. Storm outside San Diego showed no signs of easing. Heavy raindrops drummed against the cafe's windows with a hypnotic rhythm, while inside the warmth of the fireplace and the comforting scent of hot chocolate filled the air. Edward Whitmore sat at the table with Maya and baby, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. Maya, still trembling, clutched the hot chocolate that Mrs. Porter had brought over her. Small hands could barely wrap around the mug, and she sipped cautiously, as if she wasn't used to kindness. Baby Eli slept on Edward's lap, his breath soft and steady. Edward couldn't help but notice how small and frail Eli looked, his cheeks slightly sunken, a clear sign of malnutrition. Edward's Mind was spinning. He was a practical man used to handling issues swiftly, and effective. Elliot, this was something entirely different. He felt an immense responsibility for these two children. Woe had suddenly crossed his path in the midst of the storm. He looked at Maya, who now seemed a bit calmer, though fear still lingered in her eyes. Maya, can you tell me more about what happened? Edward asked gently, his tone soft and unhurried, making sure not to push her too hard. You don't have to be afraid, you're safe here, he added. Maya bit her lower lip, uncertain. She seemed to be torn between wanting to open up and the fear of trusting a stranger. Finally, as if deciding Edward was worthy of her trust, she began to speak, her voice low and filled with emotion. Eli and I were living in an orphanage. Started looking down at the cup in her hands. It was a big place with lots of kids, but the lady who took care of us, she wasn't kind. She always said we were a burden, that nobody wanted kids like us. Hearing this, Edward felt a painful knot in his chest. He couldn't fathom how anyone could be so heartless toward a child, but he sensed there was more to come, so he stayed silent, letting Maya continue at her own pace. One day she got really mad because Eli was crying. He cried a lot because he was hungry, but she never gave us enough food. Maya's voice shook, and she held her cup tightly, as if its warmth could give her the strength to go. Ansha said she was done with us, that she couldn't take care of two useless kids. Mrs. Porter, who was quietly organizing cups on the counter, overheard Maya's words and paused, visibly affected. She shot a concerned glance at Edward, who responded with a small nod, signaling he needed to hear more before reacting. She put us in her car and drove us into the city. Then she stopped on a corner and told me to get out with Eli. He said no one would care if we disappeared, that no one would miss us. Maya finally lifted her gaze to Edward, her eyes welling up with tears. I tried to follow her, but she just left, leaving us there in the rain. Edward felt a simmering anger building inside him. Thought of someone abandoning two defenseless kids on the street, left to fend for themselves. This was something he couldn't bear. He knew he needed to act, but wanted to fully understand the situation first. Oh, you remember the name of the orphanage, Maya, or where it's located? Edward asked, his voice steady but firm. Maya nodded slowly. Yes. Remember, it's out of town on the road to Guanajuato, a big old place called the House of Children. Edward paused, absorbing the information. He'd heard of that orphanage before, but had never paid it much attention. It was just another institution among many in the area, but now he sensed something was deeply wrong there. Maya, you did the right thing by telling me, Edward said, trying to convey calm and reassurance. We're going to find out what's going on at that orphanage, and I promise nothing bad will happen to you. Or lit us by her fear. Maya felt a bit of relief wash over her at Edward's words. It was as if a weight was beginning to lift from her shoulders, though she was still apprehensive. You're not going to send me back there, right? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Edward shook his head. No, Maya, I promise you won't be going back. There, we'll handle this another way. Just then Mrs. Porter approached the table, setting down a plate of freshly baked cookies. She placed it in front of Maya, who eyed the cookies with a mix of hunger and hesitation. Go ahead and eat, They're all for you, Mrs. Porter said with a warm smile. Finally Maya picked up a cookie and began nibbling on it, still a bit wary but clearly hungry. Edward watched her, his heart heavy. He knew these kids needed more than just a warm meal and a safe place to stay. They needed protection, and he was determined to provide it. While Maya ate quietly, Edward pulled out his phone and made a few calls. First, he reached out to an influential friend in the city, Commissioner Donovan Samin, who could help look into the orphanage. Next, he called his lawyer, giving a quick rundown of the situation and asking for advice on the legal steps to ensure Maya and Eli's safe. Following morning, the gentle sunrise over San Diego began breaking through the leftover storm clouds from the night before. The city streets, still damp, glistened under the soft light, and the fresh morning air carried the earthy scent of wet ground and fallen leaves. Inside Edward Whitmore's spacious, warm apartment, a calm atmosphere seemed to linger, almost surreal. Edward was up early, still processing the events of the previous night. Had spent most of the night wide awake, contemplating his next steps and trying to digest What he had learned, Adolf, he wasn't a man easily moved. The situation with Maya and Eli had stirred something deep within him. There was something terribly wrong with that orphanage, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Walked to the living room where Maya was sleeping soundly on a large cozy couch wrapped in a warm blanket. Edward looked at her small form for a moment, feeling a mix of sadness and responsibility. Eli was in the next room, peacefully resting in a makeshift crib Edward had quickly put together with what he had available. Edward knew he couldn't waste any more time, had to act right away. Picking up the phone, he called his friend, Commissioner Donovan, a trusted man who had served in the local police for years and knew San Diego like the back of his hand. Donovan, good morning. I need a favor. It's urgent, Edward said, cutting straight to the point. As soon as the commissioner answered, good morning, Whitmore, what's going on? Donovan replied, always formal and to the point. It's a complicated situation. Last night, I found a young girl and her little brother on the street, completely abandoned. They're from a place called Little Angel's Home. The girl told me some disturbing things about the place. I need you to look into it discreetly. Something isn't right there, Edward explained, his voice heavy with concern. There was a brief pause on the other end, and Edward could picture Donovan processing the information. Little Angel's Home. Heard of it, but we've never received any formal complaints against them. I'll start looking into this right away, but Whitmore, watch your back. If this is as serious as it sounds, we might be dealing with some powerful people, warned the commissioner. I understand, Donovan. I just want to make sure these kids are safe, and if there's anything illegal going on, it's stopped immediately, replied Edward, thanking his friend before ending the call. After hanging up, Edward felt he had taken an essential first step, though he knew this was only the beginning. He walked to the kitchen and began preparing a simple yet nourishing breakfast for Maya and Eli. While he worked, his thoughts drifted to the woman at the orphanage. Woe's cold, cruel demeanor was unsettling. Who was she, and why was she in charge of children when she clearly viewed them as a burden? Edward knew he wouldn't have to wait long for some answers. While still in the kitchen making toast and juice, he heard the soft sound of footsteps. Turning, he saw Maya standing at the doorway, still wrapped in a blanket, their big weary eyes glistening with pure audacity. She seemed almost shocked to be in such a comforting space after all she had endured. Good morning, Maya, Edward greeted her warm-lidded. You sleep well? Yes, sir, she replied shyly, still getting used to the idea that someone genuinely cared about her. Come have seat. I'm making breakfast for us. Eli's still asleep, so we can take our time, Edward said, guiding her to the table where he'd already placed a few plates. Maya sat down, watching Edward's every move. Closeted her. This all felt like a dream. No one had ever prepared a meal for her with such care before, or shown her such kindness as she nibbled on a slice of toast. Edward sat down across from her, searching for the right moment to ask the question she needed answers to. Maya, do you remember anything else about the orphanage? Asked gently, not wanting to pressure her. Any detail could be helpful. Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. There were lots of kids. There's some like me, but others. She paused as if searching for the right words. Others were taken away, and we never saw them again. Evelyn Crow said they had found a new home, but I never believed her. Edward felt a chill creep down his spine. Kids disappearing without any logical explanations. The story was taking a much darker turn than he anticipated. Evelyn Crow, is that her name? Edward asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Evelyn Crow, she was in charge of the orphanage. She didn't like Mesh, always said I was too much trouble. That Eli cried too much. Maya's voice began to waver, and Edward could tell she was reliving painful memories. A mix of anger and determination surged within him. He knew he needed to find this woman and uncover what was really going on at the children's home, but he'd have to proceed carefully. There was a real possibility this was more than just neglect. It could be something far more dangerous. They ate in silence. The phone rang again. Edward stood up and walked to the living room. To answer it was Officer Donovan, and the news he brought wasn't good. Edward the first asked around discreetly in town, and it seems the children's home isn't exactly what it claims to be. There are rumors that the orphanage might be involved in something darker. Child trafficking, Donovan said, his tone grave. Edward Felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. Child trafficking. I knew this was psoriasis, but that goes beyond anything I could have imagined. We have to act fast, Donovan. Those kids are in danger. We need evidence to shut that place down and arrest those involved, Edward replied, his voice firm and resolute. I'm with you, Whitmore, but we have to tread carefully. We can't afford a misstep. I'll gather my team and start putting together a plan. Can you keep the kids safe for now? Asked Donovan. Yes, I'll make sure they're secure. Let me know as soon as you have a plan. Edward hung up, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier by the second. He returned to the kitchen, where Maya waited in silence, clearly sensing that something was wrong. Edward knelt down beside her, meeting her gaze with calm resolve. Maya, I promise I'll do everything I can to protect you and Elizabeth. I need you to trust me and tell me everything you know about that orphanage. His voice was steady, filled with sincerity. Very detail could help us save other kids too. Maya looked back at Edward, her eyes revealing a mix of fear and hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. I'll tell you everything I know, she said with renewed determination. As Edward listened carefully to Maya's words, he realized he was about to face something much bigger than he anticipated, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Donovan's support and Maya's courage, he was determined to uncover the truth about what was happening at the children's home and to make sure no one else suffered at the hands of Evelyn Crow and her accomplices. Investigation was just beginning, but Edward was prepared to see it through no matter what it cost. He'll handle everything, Edward assured the lawyer on the other end of the line. Let's meet early tomorrow to discuss the details. In the meantime, make sure the kids are in a safe place. Edward thanked him and hung up. Knew the road ahead would be tough, but he was sure he had made the right choice. Those kids had crossed his path for a reason, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect them. Maya, he said gently as she finished her meal, tonight you and Eli are staying with me. I'll take care of you, and tomorrow we'll figure this all out. Sound good? She looked up at him, her big frightened eyes reflecting as much hope as fear. She nodded without saying a word, but Edward could tell that for the first time she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. As night settled over San Diego, the storm outside began to calm, but inside the cafe, Edward knew the real storm was just starting, and he was ready to face it head on. For Maya, for Eli, and for all the children who might be suffering in silence in that dark orphanage. The sun was already high in the sky, though its light barely reached the narrow, rain-soaked streets of San Diego. Edward Whitmore sat in his living room, a blend of tension and determination stirring within him. Maya was in the room, playing with some toys he picked up that morning, while Eli slept in a makeshift crib nearby. Despite the warm comfort of his home, Edward knew that the real storm was only beginning after hearing Maya's shocking revelations about the orphanage, little angels home, and the children who seemed to vanish without a trace. Edward spent hours figuring out his next move. He'd already spoken with Commissioner Donovan, had started a discreet investigation, but Edward knew he needed to gather more information before taking any concrete action. Determined to uncover more, Edward prepared to head out, put on a light jacket and a hat to shield himself from the sun. Before leaving, he approached Maya, who was focused on assembling a puzzle on the living room table. Maya, I need to go out for a bit, but I'll be back soon. You'll stay here with Eli and Mrs. Porter. We'll come by to help you take care of Hyman, right? Edward said, trying to reassure her. Maya looked up at Hyman. Edward noticed a hint of worry in her eyes. She nodded, but remained silent. Edward knew she was still scared, but she was beginning to trust him, and that was what mattered most. He'll be back soon, he promised, giving her a smile before stepping out the door. Edward drove slowly, Through the streets of San Diego, his thoughts torn between concern for the children and the pressing need to understand what was really happening at the orphanage. He knew he couldn't rely on hearsay alone. He needed solid facts and evidence to support any action against Evelyn Crow and Little Angel's home. His first stop was the city hall. Edward knew that to start piecing together this mystery, he needed a clearer understanding of the orphanage's background. A receptionist welcomed him when he arrived at the small historic building that housed the public records. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. How can I help you today?" the receptionist asked with a friendly smile. "Good morning. I'd like to access some old records specifically about Little Angel's home. I need information on who founded it, who currently runs it, and any recorded complaints or irregularities," Edward explained, keeping his tone as professional as possible. The receptionist seemed surprised by his request but nodded right away. "Sure, I'll look up those records for you. You can wait in the reading room and I'll bring whatever I find," she said, disappearing down a narrow hallway. Edward made his way to the reading room, a cozy space filled with dark wood furniture and shelves lined with books and files. He took a seat, feeling his tension rise as he waited. His thoughts kept circling back to what Maya had told him. Missing children, Evelyn Crow, cold and cruel and uncool orphanage that was meant to be a safe haven but harbored dark secrets. After a few minutes, the receptionist returned carrying a stack of folders and yellowed documents. She placed them on the table in front of Edward, who thanked her and immediately began sifting through the materials. First documents were basic records about the orphanage's founding, dated about 20 years back. Children's home have been established by a woman named Elena Marquez, a local philanthropist who, according to the records, had used her own wealth to create a home for orphaned and abandoned children. At first glance, it seemed like a genuine initiative with good intentions. However, Edward noticed a drastic change in recent years. As he moved on to the more recent records, he saw a significant shift in the orphanage's management. About 5 years ago, Elena Marquez had passed away under unclear circumstances, and the administration was transferred to a woman named Evelyn Crow. It was the name Maya had mentioned, and Edward felt a chill seeing it in print. Evelyn Crow appeared to have taken full control of the orphanage following Elena Marquez's death. Not much was documented about her background, but Edward came across a particularly unsettling piece of information. Evelyn Crow had ties to influential figures, including local business people and politicians. Shows connections might explain why, despite the rumors, no serious investigation had ever been conducted against her or the orphanage. Edward continued combing through the documents, searching for any clue that could help. Then something caught his attention. An orphanage employee's internal report mentioned that Evelyn Crow frequently relocated children without adhering to the required legal procedures. These relocations were frequently done without any documentation or tracking, and the children in question vanished without a trace. The report didn't offer many specifics, but it suggested that Evelyn Crow's methods were at the very least questionable. The employee, whose name wasn't recorded, seemed to have tried reporting these irregularities, was fired before he could take the case further. Edward felt this could be a critical lead in the investigation. Needed to find out who this employee was and what else he might know, with his mind buzzing with questions and the feeling that he was just beginning to grasp the scale of the problem. Edward thanked the receptionist and left the town hall. He knew he had to be cautious. Evelyn Crow wasn't an ordinary adversary. She had influence and connection. Chat could complicate any attempt to expose her. Back in his car, Edward picked up his phone and called Sheriff Donovan again. "Donovan, I'm leaving the town hall now. I've come across some troubling information about the children's Home and Evelyn Crow, it appears she has powerful connections and might be involved in something much bigger. Have you made any progress with the investigation? Edward asked, feeling a growing urgency. Whitmore, we're on it. I've received some intel from reliable sources confirming your suspicions. It seems Evelyn Crow is using the orphanage as a front for illegal activities, possibly child trafficking, but we need concrete evidence to move forward. I'm putting together a team to conduct a deeper investigation, but we need to be discreet. Evelyn Crow has eyes and ears everywhere. Donovan replied, his voice Serodasis. Understood. Donovan, I'll keep digging on my and keep me updated on any new developments, Edward said. Ending the call, he knew time was running out. Evelyn Crow and her network of accomplices could be just a step away from covering their tracks, and Edward needed to act quickly, but he also knew he couldn't rush and recklessly. Needed to be smart, meticulous, and above all cautious to protect Maya, Eli, and any other children who might be at risk. Edward drove back home, his mind racing with the new information. He felt more determined than ever to unmask Evelyn Crow and expose the illegal activities taking place at the children's home. But to do this, Edward would need every bit of evidence and all eyes he could trust. As he parked the car and headed back up to his apartment, he knew that every move from here on had to be carefully calculated. Was on the verge of stepping, feeling the weight of his discoveries about the children's home. The gentle sound of laughter coming from the living room greeted him as he opened his door. Maya was playing with some toys, watched over by Mrs. Porter, same woman from the cafe who had helped him the night before. With a warm, caring smile, "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Porter greeted him, standing up as he entered. "I hope you managed to sort out whatever you needed. The children are doing well." Edward smiled, feeling a brief wave of relief seeing that Maya and Eli were in safe hands, but that relief quickly faded into worry. He knew he needed to act swiftly and discreetly, know that he was more aware of what was really happening. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter. I truly appreciate your help. I need to discuss something with you, if you have a moment," Edward said, his voice carrying the weight of the situation. Mrs. Porter sensed the urgency in his tone and gestured for Maya to keep playing as she moved closer to Edward. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore, what happened?" she asked, concern deepening her expression. Edward led her to the kitchen, a spot out of earshot from the kids. "Porter, I've uncovered some troubling things about the orphanage where Maya and Eli were staying. It seems that the woman in charge, Evelyn Crow, is involved in illegal activities. I don't have all the details yet, but there are signs she's using the orphanage as a front for child trafficking." Edward paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Porter clasped her hand over her mouth, shocked by what she just heard. "Me God, I can't believe something like this is happening here in our town." "Edward, what are you going to do?" she asked, visibly shaken. "I need your help, Porter. Chief Donovan is looking into the case, but we have to be extremely careful. Don't know who might be involved, and we need solid proof before we make any moves. In the meantime, I have to make sure Maya and Eli are safe. Would you be willing to help look after them until this situation is resolved?" Edward asked, meeting her eyes despite her initial shock. Porter nodded firmly. "Of course, Edward. I'll do whatever I can to help these kids. They can't go back to that place." Porter placed a reassuring hand on Edward's shoulder, solidifying her promise. "Thank you, Porter. You have no idea how much this means to me," Edward said, feeling temporary relief as Porter headed back to join the children in the living room. Edward moved to his home office. He needed to gather his thoughts and plan his next steps. Seated at his desk, he began sorting through documents obtained from the city records office, searching for any useful clues. He scanned the files. An idea started to form in his mind. Knew Evelyn Crow would be the key to everything, and if he could gather more information on her connections and dealings, he could build a strong case against her. But for that, he'd need someone who knew the ins and outs of the children's home. Edward recalled a report that mentioned a former employee who had attempted to expose Evelyn Crow's suspicious activities before being dismissed. That person might just be the ally he needed. Determined to track them down, Edward picked up the phone and called. Chief Donovan, I was reviewing some documents from city records, and it appears there was an employee at the children's home who tried to report Evelyn Crow before he was let go. This person could be a key part of our investigation. Can you find out who it was and where they are now? Edward asked, already mentally preparing for the next step. On the other end of the line, Donovan was clearly committed to the investigation. His voice was filled with resolve. I'm already on it, Whitmore. I'll reach out to some connections and track this person down. It might take a while, but I'll do everything I can to locate that employee. In the meantime, stay alert. I got word that Evelyn Crow is starting to suspect Samin's looking into the orphanage. She might try to cover everything up if she realizes we're getting too close, warned the commissioner. Edward felt a chill at those words. He knew time was slipping away and any wrong move could risk everything. Understood, Donovan. Keep me updated as soon as you find anything, Edward replied, ending the call. He knew patience was necessary, but the urgency of the situation gnawed at him. He decided he couldn't just sit back and wait, needed to keep investigating, hunting for more clues, and preparing for whatever lay ahead. The rest of the day he spent on the phone, gathering as much information as he could about Evelyn Crow and her activities. Edward realized he would need more allies beyond just Donovan, people willing to stand up to Evelyn Crow and the forces protecting her. By late afternoon, as the sun began setting and a golden light poured through the windows, Edward went to the living room to check on the kids. Eli was still asleep, and Maya sat beside Porter, gazing out the window. How are you holding up, Maya? Edward asked, sitting beside her on the cushion. Okay, sir, she answered, but I'm a little scared Evelyn Crow won't find us. Will share. Eyes held a mix of fear and hope. Edward placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. Don't worry, Maya, I promise you and Eli are safe here. I'll make sure no one else has to go through what you both endured, Edward said firmly. Maya nodded, attempting to trust his words, though fear of Evelyn Crow still lingered deeply within her. As night settled over San Diego, Edward felt he was inching closer to a dark web of secrets and corruption. He knew the coming days would be crucial, and every choice he made could have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for Maya, Eli, and countless other children who might be in danger. Edward looked out the window, watching as the city lights began to sparkle against the darkening sky. He knew that what lay ahead would demand more than just courage. It would require sharp thinking, patience, and the ability to trust the allies he had gathered over the years. Above all, he would need the strength not to give up, even when the path ahead appeared dark and uncertain. Quiet night draped San Diego in a veil of darkness, broken only by the soft glow of streetlights and the scattered stars above. Inside Edward Whitmore's apartment, a tense calm filled the air. Sitting in his study, Edward reviewed the information he had gathered so far. Each piece of data, every small detail seemed to draw him closer to the grim truth he suspected lay hidden within the orphanage, the little angel's home. As he read through old reports and his notes from the day, Edward's phone rang, breaking the silence. He answered quickly, recognizing the number. Commissioner Donovan. What have you found? Edward asked, his voice low but brimming with anticipation. Morning sun struggled to pierce through the gray clouds hanging over San Diego, as if nature itself sensed the rising tension enveloping the city. Yet Edward Whitmore was more focused than ever after Colin Mercer's revelations the night before. He knew time was slipping away. Evelyn Crow was a dangerous woman with powerful allies and a network of corruption seemingly woven into every corner of San Diego. Every move now had to be carefully calculated. Edward had spent the night going over his notes and discussing strategies with Commissioner Donovan, determined to dismantle the child trafficking ring operating under the guise of the orphanage. The scale of the operation was daunting, but Edward knew he couldn't let fear hold him back, was committed to protecting Maya, Eli, and every other child at risk. For that he needed to act with precision and resolve it. 7 o'clock, Edward prepared to leave. He slipped on a plain shirt and a dark jacket, timing to keep a low profile before heading out. He paused in the living room where Maya and Eli still slept, wrapped in soft blankets. Maya's face, peaceful in a deep sleep, was a stark contrast to the worried look she wore during the day. Edward felt a pang of sadness thinking about everything this young girl had already faced in the kitchen. Miss Porter, ever careful, was preparing breakfast. The scent of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the air, adding a brief sense of comfort and normalcy. "Good morning, Porter," Edward greeted as he entered the kitchen. "Good morning, Edward. You're up early. Has something new happened?" Porter asked, her voice edged with concern. Edward hesitated for a moment. He knew Porter deserved to be informed, but he didn't want to overwhelm her with the sea-roadsiness of the situation. He chose his words carefully. "Things are moving fast, Porter. Colin Mercer, the worker from the orphanage, got in touch with me, and it seems Evelyn Crow might be aware that he's helping us. That puts us all in danger, and I need to make sure Colin Mercer stays safe before we move forward," Edward explained, keeping his tone steady despite his worry. Porter frowned, visibly anxious. "This is dangerous, Edward. I'm afraid of what she might do if she finds out what you're trying to accomplish, but I know you're doing this for the kids, and that gives me the strength to help however I can." "What can I do today?" she asked, determined to do her part. Edward gave a fleeting smile in appreciation of Porter's willingness to assist despite the risks. "I need you to stay here and keep an eye on the kids. They shouldn't sense that anything is wrong. If you notice anything unusual, me right away. I'll do my best to make sure everything goes smoothly today, but we can't afford any mistakes," Edward said, before taking a quick sip of his coffee. Porter nodded, fully grasping the seriousness of the situation. She knew the children needed to be kept safe, and no matter how challenging it was, she was ready to do whatever it took. After saying goodbye, Edward left the house and headed to the police station to meet with Donovan's. Drive over felt longer than usual, every minute weighing heavily on his mind. Edward couldn't shake the thought of the lives at stake. Colin Mercer was risking everything by cooperating, and Edward knew he couldn't let him down or the children still trapped in the shelter. When he arrived at the station, Donovan greeted him right away, looking as worn out as Edward felt, but equally resolute. The dark circles under the chief's eyes betrayed a sleepless night, yet his gaze was unwavering, reflecting a man devoted to justice. "Whitmore, Eve, been waiting for you. Things are heating up," Donovan said, gesturing for Edward to follow him to the meeting room. The room was dimly lit with only a single yellowish lamp casting long shadows on the concrete walls. Around the table sat some of Donovan's most trusted officers, men and women he knew were free from Evelyn Crow's influence and those of her allies. Edward recognized a few familiar-faced colleagues from previous smaller cases and felt a small sense of relief knowing they were on his side. "This is Edward Whitmore, our lead informant on this operation." Donovan introduced him to the team. "Whitmore, what have you got for us?" Edward laid out his notes on the table and started detailing everything he and Colin Mercer had uncovered. He explained how Evelyn Crow had been manipulating the orphanage's records, the suspicious financial transactions, fraudulent adoptions, and most disturbingly her direct involvement in child trafficking. As Edward spoke, the officers' expressions grew more grave. They knew they were dealing with something serious, but the extent of the operation was even more alarming than expected. "We need concrete evidence to bring Evelyn Crow and her associates down. We know she's been forging documents, but we have to catch her in the act, and we need to find those children who could still be in danger. Colin Mercer has given us a few hints on possible locations, but the information is sparse," Edward concluded, looking to Donovan for affirmation. Donovan nodded, absorbing the information and already beginning to shape a plan in his mind. "All right, Whitmore, here's what we're going to do. We'll split our team. Part of our crew will focus on gathering more solid documentation, while the other half keeps a close eye on the kids' house." Donovan said, his tone resolute. "We need to catch Evelyn Crow in the act. He'll also assign a few guys to look into the fruit shipments Colin Mercer mentioned. We have to find those kids before they disappear completely." As Donovan began coordinating tasks among the officers, Edward felt a small sense of relief. Finally, they were moving in the right direction, but he knew the path ahead was dangerous, full of potential pitfalls. Colin Mercer's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "Evelyn Crow is dangerous, has powerful connections, This meant any misstep could come with serious consequences. With the plan laid out, Donovan turned to Edwardus. Voice firm: Whitmore, understand this. This operation is high risk. Evelyn Crow has eyes and ears everywhere, so we have to be extremely cautious. We'll monitor the kid's house closely for the next 48 hours. If we spot any suspicious movement or attempt to transport the children, we'll act immediately, and in the meantime we'll tighten security around Colin Mercer to make sure Evelyn Crow doesn't get to him. Edward nodded, knowing they were treading a fine line between justice and imminent danger. Single mistake could be fatal, but turning back wasn't an option. Thanks, Donovan. I trust you and the team. We're going to bring her down, and when we do, we'll make sure she never gets a chance to harm another child again, Edward replied, feeling his resolve solidify. With clear orders and a solid plan in place, Edward left the station and headed back to his cart. Weight on his shoulders was heavy, but he knew he needed to stay calm and focus. Before heading home, he decided to make one more stop. He took the quieter streets until he reached a modest building in the city center, a small but reputable law office. He contacted Graham Keller, an old family friend and a lawyer known for his integrity and willingness to stand up to the powerful. If he wanted to ensure justice was truly served, he'd need legal support from someone like Graham. Edward received a warm welcome from the receptionist, who immediately led him to Graham's office. The attorney, the middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp eyes, rose to greet him. Edward, good to see you, though. I imagine these aren't the best circumstances, Graham said, gesturing for Edward to take a seat. You're right about that, Graham. I am tangled up in something big and dangerous. I'm digging into a child trafficking ring operating under the guise of an orphanage, and things are heating up, Edward said, cutting straight to the point. I need your legal support to make sure that when we finally bring this operation down, everything is handled by the book. We can't afford any loopholes, explained. Graham listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. This is serious, Edward. Child trafficking is one of the darkest things out there, and if these people are as powerful as you say, we'll have to tread very carefully, but you can count on me, Graham assured him, his tone carrying a steady confidence. I'll make sure that when the time comes, every legal angle is covered. We can't let these people escape justice. A technicality. Edward felt a moment of relief knowing he could rely on Graham's legal backing was essential to the entire operation, and having someone skilled and trustworthy on board was reassuring. Thank you, Graham. This means a lot to me. I have to go now, but I'll be in touch as soon as we have something concrete. Let's do this the right way, Edward said, standing and shaking the lawyer's hand. I'll be waiting for your call, Edward, and be careful. The people you're up against won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to protect themselves, just and warned, meeting his gaze before they parted ways. As Edward left Graham's office and headed to his car, felt the weight of responsibility grow with each step. He was involved in something far larger than he anticipated. That night, he stumbled upon Maya and Eli in the rain. Now he was racing against time, with lives on the line and enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. While driving home, Edward received an unexpected call. Colin Mercer's voice was thick with tension. Whitmore, I think someone's following me. I'm scared that Evelyn Crow might know what we're up to. Need to get out of here now, he said, urgency clear in his tone. Edward's heart raced. If Colin Mercer was right, it meant Evelyn Crow was a step ahead, and their window to act was shrinking faster than he had anticipated. Colin Mercer, stay calm. He'll send a team to pick you up. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Just head to the safe place we talked about, and I'll make sure you get there in one piece, Edward replied, his voice steady, even as worry grew in his mind. All right, I'm heading out. No, but Whitmore, please be careful. If Evelyn Crow knows about Mesh, might also be tracking your moves, Colin Mercer said before ending the call. Immediately, Edward dialed Donovan to fill him in. Donovan, there's a chance Evelyn Crow knows what we're up to. Need to move quickly to keep Colin Mercer safe. Dispatch a team to get him and ensure he stays protected, and keep our movements as discreet as possible. We can't let her catch wind of how close we are, Edward said, his voice tight with tension. If you're listening to this and are excited about this story, let us know by writing French fries in the commencement. Let's continue, Donovan replied without hesitation. I'm sending a team right now, but Whitmore, you need to watch yourself too if Evelyn Crow really knows about Colin Mercer. She might be monitoring everything we do. Things are getting more dangerous, Donovan warned before ending the call. Edward knew things were escalating quick. Every step had to be planned carefully, and any mistake could be fatal. Air in San Diego felt heavier, as if the whole city was bracing for an impending storm, and Edward felt like he was in the eye of the hurricane. As he drove home, his mind raced. Knew he had to protect Colin Mercer, secure the children's safety, and at the same time gather enough evidence to bring Evelyn Crow down without alerting his enemies. Edward knew their entire network was close to collapse. When he arrived home, Mrs. Porter greeted him, her face etched with concern. Edward, what's going on? You seem more tense than usual. Did something go wrong? She asked, her voice filled with worry. Edward hesitated, debating whether to share the latest twist with her. In the end, he decided that honesty was best. There's a chance Evelyn Crow knows what we're up to. Porter, that means we're all at risk, especially Colin Mercer. He's in danger, and I need to make sure he's safe before I go any further. But I need you to keep an eye on the kids and keep everything as normal as possible. I don't want anyone suspecting something's wrong, Edward said, attempting to stay calm. Porter nodded, though fear was evident in her expression. I understand, Edward. I'll do my best to keep things calm here, but please be careful. Those children need you, she replied, her voice warm with maternal concern. Edward managed a quick smile before retreating to his office. He needed a moment to gather his thoughts and map out the next steps. As he sat in his chair, his mind drifted back to Colin Mercer's words. If Evelyn Crow knows about me, she might know about you too. The thought gnawed. Edward knew he was dealing with people who had no morals, but there was no turning back. No was determined to protect Maya, Eli, and all the others who were in danger. As night closed in, Edward continued planning, weighing each move carefully. He knew he was racing against time, and each decision could be the difference between success and failure. That night, the darkness in San Diego felt even thicker. Edward could sense that something was about to happen, something that would change the investigation, perhaps his life forever. But he was ready. Whatever came his way, he was prepared to confront Evelyn Crow and dismantle her network of corruption for good. Whitmore, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is we tracked down the former orphanage employee you mentioned. His name is Colin Mercer. Worked at the children's home for 3 years, but was abruptly dismissed shortly after attempting to report Evelyn Crow. It seemed he had uncovered too much. The troubling part was that Colin Mercer was now too afraid to speak. Evelyn Crow has powerful connections, and he fears for his life if he gets involved again, explained Donovan with a seriousness that didn't go unnoticed by Edward. Edward stayed silent for a moment, processing the information. Colin Mercer might hold the key to unraveling the mysteries of the orphanage, but convincing him to talk would be a challenge. He was this terrified. Where is he now, Donovan? I need to talk to him in person. Maybe I can convince him it's worth the risk, Edward said, resolute as hiding out in a small village on the outskirts of San Diego. I won't lie to you. Whitmore is pretty shaken up, but you might be able to earn his trust. I'll send you the address. Be careful, Donovan replied before hanging up. As soon as he got the message with the address, Edward felt a mix of urgency and caution. He knew he had to move fast, but he also couldn't risk scaring Colin Mercer further. This man might be the missing piece needed to expose Evelyn Crow and bring down the network she seemed to be building within the orphanage. Edward decided not to waste any time. He put on a light jacket and slipped out of his apartment quietly. Mrs. Porter, who was watching over the children, noticed him leaving and approached him. You're heading out again, Edward? The kids are fine, but they seem calmer when you're around, she said with a hint of worry. I know, Porter, but I need to find someone who can help us sort all of this out. I won't be long. Please keep taking care of them. If you need anything, call me, Edward replied, trying to reassure her before heading out the door. The night was chilly and the air held a fresh scent of damp earth. Edward got into his car and navigated through the dim streets, heading toward the village where Colin Mercer was hiding. road wound tightly as he left the center of San Diego, with the city lights fading behind him, giving way to an almost complete darkness. After about 30 minutes, Edward reached the village Donovan had described. It was a small cluster of rustic houses, most of them adobe with clay roofs lined along a dirt path. Edward parked the car and stepped out, glancing at the few remaining lights still on in the neighborhood. Homesh double-checked the address and made his way to a modest house set a little back from the others. Knocked on the door, which was slightly ajar, and waited for a moment. There was no response. Then the sound of cautious footsteps approached. The door opened just enough for him to see an older man with a face lined with deep wrinkles and a wary gaze. "Colin Mercer, I'm Edward Whitmore. Commissioner Donovan told me where to find you. I need to talk to you," Edward said, keeping his voice calm and low. Colin Mercer looked at Edward with a mix of fear and uncertainty. He hesitated before opening the door a bit wide, allowing Edward a glimpse of the sparsely furnished inner roads. "Donovan said you'd be coming. Come in, but keep your voice down. I can't risk anyone overhearing us," Colin Mercer said, his voice trembling slightly as he stepped back to let Edward enter. The house was simple, with minimal furniture and dim lighting. Colin Mercer led Edward to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. He gestured for Edward to sit and took a seat himself, visibly tense. "What do you want from me, Whitmore?" Colin Mercer asked bluntly. Edward knew he had to be straightforward. He could see Colin Mercer was scared, but he also understood that the only way to get the information he needed was by showing Colin Mercer he could be trusted. "Colin Mercer, I know you tried to report Evelyn Crow and what was happening at the children's home, and I know that because of that you lost your job and had to go into hiding, but I'm here to tell you you're not alone. Commissioner Donovan and I are investigating Evelyn Crow. Need your help to expose her and make sure no one else suffers under her watch," Edward explained, speaking in a tone that aimed to reassure him. Colin Mercer lowered his gaze, running his hands over his face as if trying to push away painful memories. "You don't understand what you're asking. Evelyn Crow is dangerous. Whitmore has powerful connections. When I started realizing what was really happening at the orphanage, I tried to report it, but no one wanted to listen. They said I was making things up. Then they fired me. They threatened me, saying if I didn't disappear, something awful would happen to Meth. That's why I'm here hiding," Colin Mercer said, his voice filled with bitterness and fear. Edward leaned forward, trying to connect with Colin Mercer, both physically and emotionally. "Colin Mercer, I understand your fear, but think about the kids still. They're the ones who might vanish without a trace. If we don't stop Evelyn Crow, how many more will suffer? Promise I'll do everything I can to protect you, but we need your help. You know more than anyone what's happening in that children's home. We need you to reveal the truth," Edward urged, his voice heavy with urgency. Colin Mercer fell silent for a long moment, as if battling his own inner demons. Finally he sighed and looked at Edward with a mix of resignation and determination. "Evelyn Crow is involved in child trafficking. I saw the transactions. I saw them taking the kids away. I never knew where they went, but I knew it wasn't good. She made it all look legal, like it was adoption. But the paperwork was fake, and the kids simply vanished. I tried going to the authorities, but she has people everywhere, and now you tell me Donovan has been alerted. That gives me a little hope. I'll help you, Whitmore, but we have to be careful," Colin Mercer said, finally accepting the need to act. Edward felt a wave of relief. Though he knew the danger was escalating, they were stepping into something big, something that could put everyone at risk. "Thank you, Colin Mercer. I know it's tough, but together we can make a difference. I need you to tell me everything you know, every detail. We'll build a solid case, bring Evelyn Crow down once and for all," Edward said, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Colin Mercer nodded and began to recount all he knew. He described how Evelyn Crow manipulated orphanage records, forged adoption papers, and took the children often at night to unknown destinations. Talked about suspicious financial transactions and how employees who asked too many questions were silenced. As Colin Mercer spoke, Edward took notes, each detail revealing the magnitude of Evelyn Crow's network. Knew this information could be the key to dismantling the entire scheme. But he also understood thee. We're now in a dangerous game where any mistake could be fatal. After hours of talking, Colin Mercer finally stop it, exhausted but relieved to have shared the truth. That's everything. It's all I know. I hope it's enough to take Evelyn Crow down, but please. Whitmore, careful, these people have no limits. Colin Mercer said, his eyes weary but determined. Edward placed a hand on Colin Mercer's shoulder, a gesture of